The morning sun bathed the town square in soft gold, as folding chairs filled with families, scouts, and veterans alike. It was Veterans Day, and the small community of Whitestone had turned out in full to honor their heroes. Rows of flags fluttered gently in the breeze. A stage had been set up beneath the memorial arch, where speeches would soon begin. Uniforms, crisp blues, grays, and the occasional faded olive, dotted the crowd. Handshakes and polite nods passed between strangers. It was the kind of morning meant for unity. Then he arrived. Elias Monroe, a tall black man in his mid-60s, walked slowly into the seating area with the help of a cane. He wore a simple blazer, slacks, and an old but impeccably kept Marine Corps cap with a golden eagle pinned to the front. His back was straight despite the years, and his face bore the quiet, heavy calm of someone who had seen things and survived. As Elias scanned the rows for an empty chair, he received some polite nods, but also curious stares. One woman, holding her child's hand, offered a gentle smile as he passed. But then, a voice pierced the soft hum of the morning. "Excuse me, sir," came the sharp, clipped tone of a woman in a quilted vest and pearl earrings. She stepped out from her row, hand on her hip. "That these seats are reserved for veterans." Elias paused, his expression neutral. "Yes, ma'am. I am one." She gave a tight-lipped laugh. "I'm sure you are. But these are for those who served in our armed forces, not guests or community members." Several nearby people looked over, eyes widening. "I did serve," Elias replied evenly, voice calm. U.S. Marine Corps, 2nd Battalion, Fallujah. But the woman, already uncomfortable, didn't back down. "Well, I didn't see your name on the list. These seats are for those who actually fought for this country." A hush fell over the nearby rows. Elias's eyes didn't change. He simply nodded once, turned, and walked back. Not because he was wrong, but because he had learned how dignity works. But not everyone was content to let the moment slide. And far above on the stage, a pair of sharp eyes in full uniform had been watching. Major General Arthur Caldwell had seen the whole thing from the stage. From the moment Elias Monroe entered the crowd, to the confrontation with the woman in the vest, to the quiet way the man had turned around, not angry, not defeated, just tired. Caldwell's jaw tightened behind his medals. He had known Elias Monroe, not just the name, the man. It had been nearly 20 years. But you don't forget the voice that called for medevac under fire in the dead of night. You don't forget the squad leader who dragged 3 wounded men across open sand with bullets raining down. You don't forget the man who didn't ask for medals, just silence, and who disappeared after the war like so many others, fading into civilian life without ceremony. And now, here he was, in his hometown, being asked to move by a woman who wouldn't know courage if it saluted her. Caldwell glanced at the event schedule, then stood up before his name was called. He adjusted his coat and walked off the back of the stage, his aide trailing in confusion. "Sir," the aide asked. "I'll be right back," Caldwell said. "This can't wait." The crowd murmured as the decorated general stepped down from the stage and moved briskly through the aisles. The color guard shifted awkwardly, unsure what was happening. Elias had just reached the edge of the square, about to sit quietly on a bench beneath a tree, when he heard someone call his name, a voice filled with authority, but also familiarity. "Sergeant Monroe." He turned. Major General Caldwell stood a few paces away, already lifting his right hand into a sharp, practiced salute. The crowd froze. Caldwell held the salute. Elias stood slowly. His cane clicked against the concrete as he rose, then returned the salute, not out of pride, but instinct, habit, memory. Gasps echoed through the rows. Cameras lifted, cell phones pointed. The woman who had confronted Elias turned pale, her mouth slightly open. Caldwell lowered his hand and stepped forward. "It's been too long," he said softly. Elias offered a small nod. "You look taller with all those stars," he said, a hint of a smile. "You always were the better Marine," Caldwell replied. Then he turned toward the crowd, his voice now elevated and unmistakably clear. "Ladies and gentlemen, you were nearly deprived of the honor of sitting beside a true hero. This man is not just a veteran. He is a decorated combat leader, a man I've had the privilege to serve with in the worst of circumstances. His name belongs on every list and every monument in this town. And if you don't know it yet, you should. Silence. And then applause. Slow, awkward at first, then rising into a roar that filled the square. Elias stood still, his face unreadable, but his eyes shimmered faintly. He wasn't invisible anymore. The applause still echoed through the square as Elias Monroe remained where he stood, stoic, composed, though his heart beat just a little faster in his chest. It wasn't the clapping that moved him. It was the recognition. Not as a symbol, but as a man. General Caldwell motioned gently toward the front of the crowd. "Come," he said. "There's a seat next to me that's been empty too long." Elias hesitated. Not from pride, but from years of being overlooked, dismissed, moved aside. The weight of it was hard to shed, even with medals and salutes. But then, from the middle of the crowd, a young boy, no older than 10, stood and clapped harder than anyone else. He wore a little cap far too big for his head, and he beamed up at Elias like he was watching a superhero. That was enough. Elias moved forward, slow and dignified. As he passed through the rows, people stood, not because they were told, but because it felt right. The same people who had looked away earlier now cleared a path. Even the woman in the vest stepped back, eyes wide, mouth shut. She didn't apologize. She didn't need to. Her silence said enough. Caldwell helped Elias up the steps of the platform. They sat side by side, the general's chest glittering with stars and stripes. Elias's cap slightly faded, but no less honorable. The ceremony resumed, the national anthem, the names of the fallen, the local school choir singing softly in the background. But now, the tone had changed. People didn't just listen. They watched Elias. When the master of ceremonies returned to the podium, he cleared his throat and made an announcement not on the program. Today we are honored to welcome a last-minute guest, a man whose presence reminds us of what humility, service, and dignity truly look like. Please welcome Sergeant Elias Monroe. Elias blinked, surprised. The microphone was handed to him. He hadn't prepared a speech. He never liked speeches. But he stood anyway, the square now dead silent. "I didn't come here to be noticed," he began, voice calm. "I came because some of the men I served with, they didn't make it back. I come for them." Every year he paused. And I come to remember that even if time forgets us, we don't forget each other. That's what being a veteran means. A hush hung in the air. Then thunderous applause again, this time not for a title or a rank, but for a man who had quietly shown a town its own blind spots, and still stood tall. After the ceremony ended, the crowd began to disperse, but all eyes remained on Elias Monroe. He descended the stage carefully, assisted once again by General Caldwell, who stayed close, not out of ceremony, but respect. Dozens approached Elias. A mother with her child whispered, "Thank you for your service." A man in a construction uniform took off his hard hat and extended a hand. Even a few teens who hadn't paid much attention earlier now looked up at him like he was part of something bigger, something they finally understood. And then came the mayor. Diane Herrera was in her second term as mayor of Whitestone. Sharp, politically polished, but not immune to the tension that had unfolded in front of her constituents. She had watched everything from the front row, her prepared remarks forgotten in her lap. Now she stepped forward, heels crunching softly against the brick walkway. "Sergeant Monroe," she said with a warm but slightly apologetic smile, "I owe you a welcome, and perhaps an apology on behalf of the town." Elias looked her in the eye. "I don't need an apology, Mayor." She tilted her head. "May I offer something else instead?" He nodded, cautious. "There's an event next month," she continued. "A special council session to rename the Civic Center downtown. We were going to name it after one of the founding mayors, but after today," she paused, "I'd like to submit a new name to the board." Elias blinked. "You're serious?" "You reminded this town what real service looks like. Quiet, steady, Unshakable, she said. I think it's time our city honors that kind of legacy. From behind her, General Caldwell nodded. She's not wrong. About time this place got some new heroes on the walls. Elias said nothing at first. He wasn't a man who sought praise. He never had. But for the first time in years, the world around him wasn't asking for proof of his worth. It was offering recognition. He took a breath, then said, "If it helps someone else feel like they belong, I'll accept." The mayor smiled. "Good. We'll be in touch." As she walked away, Elias turned toward Caldwell, who had remained quiet through the exchange. "You knew they'd come around?" Elias asked him. The general smirked. "No, but I knew you wouldn't back down." The two men stood in the warm afternoon sun, not speaking, not needing to. The town had finally seen, and the healing, slow, overdue, but real, had begun. That evening, the golden warmth of the ceremony faded into the soft hush of twilight as Elias Monroe sat on the worn porch of his home just outside Whitestone. The same porch he had returned to year after year, unnoticed, unbothered, and until today, unacknowledged. His Marine Corps cap sat beside him on the armrest. In his hands, he cradled a small box, one he hadn't opened in years. Inside were medals, not many, but enough to weigh on a man's memory. A Purple Heart, dulled with time, a Navy commendation, a folded-up photo, creased and yellowed, of his unit in Fallujah. Young men, most of whom never made it back. Elias stared at it for a long moment. He had never cared much for ceremonies, or speeches, or spotlights. That wasn't why he served. In war, you didn't fight for applause. You fought for the man beside you, for survival, for home. And yet, today felt different. For the first time in decades, he hadn't just remembered his service. The world had remembered him. A soft knock broke the silence. He looked up to see his neighbor, Marcus, a teenager from down the street who usually kept to himself. Today, though, Marcus held something in his hands, a small hand-drawn card. "I saw you on the live stream," the boy said shyly. "My mom showed me." Elias took the card and opened it. Inside, in uneven handwriting, were just a few words. "Thank you for showing me what courage looks like." Elias swallowed, emotion catching in his throat. He nodded once, and Marcus turned to leave, but not before glancing back with quiet admiration. Elias looked back at the card, then down at the medals in the box. For the first time in years, he took the Purple Heart out and pinned it to the inside lining of his blazer. Not for display, not for others, but for himself. The buzz around Elias Monroe's appearance at the Veterans Day ceremony spread quickly through Whitestone. The town's newspaper ran a front-page photo of General Caldwell saluting him. Local radio stations brought up his name in conversations about honor and race. For a town long set in its ways, Elias had become a symbol of quiet resilience and unexpected change. A week later, a letter arrived in his mailbox. Handwritten, no official stamp. Just neat cursive and a return address from Whitestone High School. It was from a teacher, Miss Delaney. She wrote, "Mr. Monroe, I was at the ceremony. I teach U.S. history here at the high school. We're in a unit about military service and civic responsibility. After what happened, several students asked if you could come in and speak. They said they've never seen someone who looked like them be honored like that in real life. Would you consider it? Even for a few minutes?" Elias folded the letter and leaned back in his chair. The last time he'd walked into a high school, he was barely a man himself. And the idea of standing in front of teenagers, speaking publicly, telling stories he'd buried for decades, wasn't exactly something he had planned. But something about the letter pulled at him. Maybe because, for the first time, someone wasn't asking him to explain himself. They were simply asking to hear him. The next Thursday, he stepped into Whitestone High wearing his blazer and Marine Corps cap. A school official met him at the front office, eyes wide with awe. "We're honored to have you here, Sergeant Monroe." He was led to the auditorium, where over 100 students sat waiting, murmuring in their seats. Some looked bored, others curious, a few whispering, "That's him," as he walked in. Elias stood at the podium, cleared his throat, and looked out at the room full of bright, restless minds. He didn't give a speech. Instead, he told a story about joining the Marines at 19, about the desert heat, about losing friends, about coming home and learning that not every uniform earns the same respect, about standing tall anyway. He didn't dramatize it. He didn't sugarcoat it. He just told the truth. And the students, every single one, listened. When he finished, a girl in the front row raised her hand. "Why did you go back the next year after the war, even if nobody noticed?" Elias paused. "Because I remember those who couldn't," he said quietly. "And if I stop showing up, who will?" The room was silent, moved, changed. As he left the school that day, the principal caught up with him in the hallway. "Mr. Monroe, thank you. You didn't just teach our students something about history. You made them feel like they were part of it." Elias nodded. For the first time, he did too. City Hall was packed. It wasn't a public holiday and it wasn't some national broadcast event. But inside Whitestone's council chamber, every seat was filled. Parents with kids, veterans in old uniforms, teachers, students, and local reporters, all squeezed in shoulder to shoulder. At the front, a new bronze plaque was draped in cloth. Mayor Diane Herrera stood at the podium, glancing across the room with a mix of excitement and reverence. She adjusted the mic, tapped it gently, and began. "Today is not about political statements. It's about course correction. It's about recognition, of the kind too often delayed or denied." She turned to the man seated at her right. "Sergeant Elias Monroe, please stand." Elias rose slowly, not for show, just as he always did, with quiet grace. "And now," the mayor continued, "it is with deep honor that we unveil the new name of our downtown civic center, which will now be known as the Elias Monroe Veterans Hall." Gasps, then applause erupted. Cameras flashed, people rose. Elias stood motionless for a moment, stunned. He had thought this was a small tribute, a certificate, a handshake, not a building, not legacy. But then, from the far side of the room, a familiar face stood too. The woman in the tan vest, the one who had tried to move him from his seat just a week ago. She didn't wear arrogance today. No tight-lipped smirk, no defensive stare, just something softer, uncomfortable, but honest. When Elias stepped off the stage, the crowd parted again, not out of obligation but with respect. The woman didn't look away this time. She reached into her purse and pulled out something unexpected, a small folded program from the Veterans Day ceremony. She held it out to him. "I kept it," she said. "I watched the replay. I saw what I didn't see before he took the program, looked at her, said nothing." She took a breath. "I'm sorry. It wasn't rehearsed. It wasn't loud. But it was real." Elias gave a quiet nod, not in forgiveness, not in anger, just in acknowledgement. Then, he stepped forward to shake her hand. The moment passed without fanfare, but those close enough to see it would remember it far longer than the plaque. That night, as the crowd left and the lights dimmed, Elias remained in the building bearing his name. He walked its halls slowly, letting his fingertips run along the smooth new signage, the polished frames, the echo of footsteps that now felt like they belonged to him. He was no longer just a visitor in his town. He was part of its story. And finally, it was part of his.